The following review has been approved by Lord Carnage and the best of Classic Game Room. Welcome to Classic Game Room, where it's time to learn history through video games with this factual retelling of the events in World War II. It's 1942 for your Nintendo Famicom. Well, 1942 isn't much for the ears. It's a joy to play because it's one of the truly classic vertical scrolling arcade-style shooters. From Capcom, this was originally released in 1984, a year that George Orwell predicted would have awesome video games. Yeah, he actually didn't, but I'm sure he would have if he could. I've always liked this game. I like the genre, but I used to play 1942 at a bowling alley back in the day. It always reminded me of one of my favorite movies, The Final Countdown. You know, the movie where the aircraft carrier goes back in time and the Americans have to defend Pearl Harbor from the Japanese Zeros using F-14s? Well, in this game, you're basically reliving the Pacific Theater in an American P-38, blowing up the entire Japanese Air Force. Which is kind of ironic considering it's a Japanese game. And a really good one at that. I have 1942 in my multicade, so I spent a week playing it before I tore into the Famicom version, and I gotta tell you, this is a great home console edition of 1942. It's also on the Western NES. What you do in the game is fairly simple. You shoot down everything in the air except yourself. And if you want to get the really big points, it's all about the percentage of enemies that you destroy during each round. Look, it's my little buddy straight out of Musha. Well, not quite. There's a couple different power-ups, and instead of a super bomb or whatever, the other NES or Famicom button will send your plane into a loop out of harm's way. Pretty handy, actually. You score points for the loops that you don't use. And there's a variety of ways to score big points in the game as well, like those secret airplanes flying away from you. And if you can shoot down a bunch of bombers without taking any hits yourself, they start to increase in value. 1942 is a really well-balanced game, and the NES version, or the Famicom version seen here, is a bit easier than the arcade machine. It's not quite as fast, so I got a high score here, which I was quite pleased about. In fact, I'm just pleased with this version of the game in general. It's been a long time since I've played 1942. I used to have this game way back in the day. I've still got 1943, reviewed that years ago. It's incredible, of course. And this has a bunch of other sequels, like 1942 Joint Strike and Robotron 2084. Where instead of shooting down airplanes, you're fighting robots with lasers. I'm sure that's a sequel. I'm almost positive. The music is a bit abrasive. It's too bad they couldn't put the Bionic Commando soundtrack on top of this one. 1942 starts off easy, but it gets tricky quickly, especially when those annoying green airplanes start to swirl around you. My advice is to shoot everything that moves. And that's good advice, I suggest you take it. Let's fight a boss battle here, which is pretty tame compared to the modern crop of bullet hell shooters. If you enjoy classic vertical scrolling shooters like Star Soldier or Xevious, you're gonna love this, although odds are you've already played it. And if you haven't played it, well, good news, it's relatively cheap and easy to collect for your NES or Famicom. Just remember, your hit percentage is really what counts here if you're going for a big score and you also get extra lives, so try to shoot down everything, and have fun, it's not easy. It is a great game, it's 1942, and I've got a classic Game Room shout out and thank you to send to the land down under, where, as far as I was concerned for most of my life, the women glowed and the men thundered. But apparently, according to the internet, men plunder in Australia. Who knew? Were it not for men at work, I would have never heard of Vegemite. Thank you to Adrian from Sydney, Australia, for sending 1942. I always assumed that Vegemite was like Australian spam made from kangaroos or something. I had no idea. Thanks again, Adrian, and thanks to Capcom for making such a kick-ass game. 1942 on the Famicom. Highly recommended. The best of classic game room is on DVD, Blu-ray, and Laser Hypervision album set. Kangaroo sandwich.